I thought I still had time. Time to visit her again. Time to return her calls. Time to sit beside her and really listen. But when the phone rang that afternoon, everything changed. She wasn't asking for much. Just one thing. A final wish I didn't expect, and honestly didn't want to hear. Because it meant going back to something I had spent years trying to forget. I said yes anyway, and that promise broke something inside me. But what I didn't realize was, it would also change everything I thought I understood about love, family, and forgiveness. I was standing in my kitchen when the phone started ringing, and I almost ignored it. It was a normal afternoon, the kind that blends quietly into every other weekday without asking for attention. The dishwasher hummed softly behind me, and sunlight slipped through the blinds in thin golden lines across the counter. I had just poured myself a second cup of coffee I didn't really need, trying to push through the last few emails waiting on my laptop. The phone kept ringing. I glanced at it once, then twice, letting it vibrate against the wooden surface like it had all the time in the world. Unknown number. No caller ID. Those calls usually meant spam or something I didn't feel like dealing with in that moment. It stopped. For a second, everything felt still again. The hum of the dishwasher returned to being the loudest thing in the room. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, and tried to go back to whatever I was doing before. Then it rang again. This time, something about it felt different. Not louder, not more urgent, just persistent in a way that made it harder to ignore. I set the cup down and stared at the screen for a moment longer than I should have. Unknown number. I don't know why, but my chest tightened just a little before I reached for it. Hello. There was a pause on the other end. Not long, but long enough to make me pull the phone slightly closer to my ear. Hi, is this Emily? The voice was calm, professional, but there was something careful in the way she spoke, like she was choosing each word before letting it out. Yes, this is Emily. Hi, Emily. My name is Karen. I'm calling from Greenfield Care Center. The name hit me softly at first, like a memory brushing past without fully stopping. Greenfield Care Center. I had heard it before. I knew I had. And then it settled. My stomach dropped just a little. Oh, okay. I didn't say anything else right away. I think part of me already knew where this was going, but I wasn't ready to meet it there yet. I'm calling about your grandmother, Margaret, she continued gently. My fingers tightened around the phone without me realizing it. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, the cool surface pressing through my shirt as if grounding me in place. Yes, I said, quieter now. Is she okay? There was another pause. Not empty this time. Careful. She's stable, Karen said, and I noticed how she chose that word instead of anything comforting. But her condition has declined over the past couple of days. I closed my eyes for a second, just long enough to feel the weight of that sentence settle somewhere deep. Declined. She's been asking for you, Karen added softly. That was the part that landed the hardest. I opened my eyes and stared at the light stretching across the kitchen floor, watching dust move slowly through it like time had suddenly slowed down. Asking for me? I repeated almost under my breath. Yes, she said. She's been very clear about wanting to see you. A quiet filled the space between us again, but this one felt heavier than before. Not awkward. Not uncertain. Just full of something I didn't want to name yet. When should I come? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. As soon as you can, Karen replied gently. It would be best if you didn't wait. Didn't wait. The words echoed in my head longer than they should have. Okay, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'll be there. Thank you, Emily, she said. We'll be here. The call ended with a soft click, and suddenly the kitchen felt too quiet. I stood there for a moment, still holding the phone, as if it might ring again and tell me this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But it didn't. Everything stayed exactly the same. The dishwasher hummed. The coffee sat untouched on the counter. The sunlight hadn't moved much at all. And yet, something had shifted. I slowly placed the phone down and leaned both hands against the counter, staring at nothing in particular. My mind wasn't racing. It wasn't even clear. It just hovered, like it didn't know where to land first. Grandma. I hadn't said her name out loud in a while. Not like this. Not in a way that carried weight. The last time I saw her came back to me in pieces. A quiet room, a polite visit, promises to come again soon. The kind of promises that sound real when you say them, even if you don't fully mean them. I swallowed slowly, feeling something uncomfortable settle in my chest. She's been asking for you. I pushed myself upright and glanced around the kitchen, suddenly aware of how normal everything looked. There were dishes in the sink, a grocery list stuck to the fridge. My laptop still open with half-finished work staring back at me. Life, exactly as I had left it a few minutes ago. But I couldn't step back into it. Not now. I walked toward the living room, grabbing my keys from the small bowl near the door. They jingled softly in my hand, an ordinary sound that felt strangely distant. My reflection caught me in the hallway mirror as I passed by. I looked the same. Same clothes. Same tired eyes. Nothing on the outside had changed, but something inside me felt unsettled. I slipped on my shoes slowly, like delaying it might somehow stretch the moment longer. Like there was still time to sit back down, to finish my coffee, to pretend this call hadn't happened yet. But there wasn't. I opened the front door, and a light breeze met me outside, cool and quiet against my face. The neighborhood looked peaceful, almost untouched by anything urgent or heavy. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A car passed by slowly at the end of the street. Everything felt normal. Too normal. I locked the door behind me and walked toward my car, each step steady but distant, like I was watching myself from somewhere just outside my own body. As I reached for the handle, I paused. Just for a second. My hand hovered there, not quite touching it, as a thought slipped quietly into my mind. When was the last time I actually sat with her? Not visited. Not stopped by quickly. Not checked a box. Really sat with her. I couldn't answer that. And that silence felt louder than anything else. I exhaled slowly, finally opening the car door and sliding into the driver's seat. The familiar smell of the interior wrapped around me, grounding and distant at the same time. I placed the keys in the ignition, but didn't turn them right away. Instead, I sat there, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the quiet street ahead. She's been asking for you. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting that sentence settle fully this time. Then I opened them again, took a slow breath, and turned the key. The engine came to life with a low, steady sound. And just like that, everything I had been avoiding for so long began to move toward me all at once. I pulled out of the driveway, not fully ready for what was waiting at the end of this drive, but knowing, deep down, that I couldn't turn away anymore. The road to Greenfield Care Center felt longer than I remembered, even though nothing about it had changed. I had driven this route before, just not often enough to know it by heart. The turns were familiar in a distant way, like places you recognize but never truly pay attention to. Suburban streets stretched out quietly ahead of me, lined with trees that were just beginning to turn a softer shade of green. The sky was clear, almost too calm for the weight sitting in my chest. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, my grip steady, but slightly tighter than usual. The radio was off. It had been off since I started the car. Silence felt easier than trying to fill the space with something meaningless. At the first red light, I slowed to a stop and glanced briefly at the cars around me. A woman in the next lane was sipping coffee, tapping her fingers lightly against the wheel. A man across the intersection adjusted his rearview mirror, his expression neutral, focused only on where he needed to go next. Everyone seemed to be moving through their day, without interruption. I swallowed slowly and looked straight ahead again as the light turned green. I pressed the gas gently, letting the car roll forward, but my mind stayed somewhere behind me. Somewhere I didn't want to look too closely. She's been asking for you. The words returned, softer this time, but heavier. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to shake the feeling building quietly inside me, but it stayed. It wasn't sharp or overwhelming, just present, steady, uncomfortable in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I reached over and picked up my phone from the passenger seat, unlocking it without thinking. No new notifications. For a moment, I hesitated, then opened my voicemail. Her name wasn't saved under anything special. Just Grandma. Simple. Familiar. easy to overlook in a list of missed calls. There were more than I expected. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering just above the most recent message. The date was from a few days ago. I must have seen it. I must have told myself I'd listen later. I pressed play. Her voice came through softly, a little weaker than I remembered, but still unmistakably hers. "Hi, sweetheart, it's me." I felt my chest tighten just hearing those words. "I was just thinking about you today," she continued, her tone gentle, almost warm in that quiet way she always had. "I know you're busy, but I'd love to hear your voice when you get a chance." There was a small pause, like she was deciding whether to say more. "No rush," she added quickly. "Just wanted to say I love you." The message ended with a soft click. I didn't move for a few seconds. Traffic flowed around me, steady and uninterrupted, but everything inside the car felt still. I placed the phone back down slowly, my fingers lingering on it for just a moment longer than necessary. No rush. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding.
She had always said that.
No pressure, no guilt, no demands, just patience. And I had taken that patience and stretched it farther than I should have. The road curved gently to the right, leading me toward a more familiar stretch now. I passed the small grocery store on the corner, the one we used to stop at when I was younger. I hadn't thought about that place in years. But suddenly, I could see it clearly. I was maybe 8 or 9, sitting in the passenger seat of her old car. She always kept peppermint candies in the glove compartment, handing me one before we even started driving. "Just one," she would say, smiling in that quiet way of hers. I smiled faintly at the memory, but it didn't last long, because right behind it came another thought. When was the last time I sat in a car with her like that? Not visiting, not rushing in and out,
just being there.
I couldn't remember. I adjusted my grip on the wheel again, my fingers pressing lightly into the leather as the realization settled deeper. It hadn't been one moment. It had been a pattern. Missed calls, short visits, promises pushed to next week, or when things slow down. Things never slowed down. I passed a park on my right, one we used to walk through during the summers. I could almost hear her voice again, pointing out flowers I never paid much attention to back then. "Look at that color," she'd say, stopping just long enough to admire something small and easily overlooked. She had a way of noticing things, details, moments, people, and I had a way of rushing past them. A car hunked lightly behind me, pulling me back into the present. The light had turned green again, and I hadn't moved. I pressed the gas quickly, nodding slightly in apology, even though the driver couldn't see me. My heart felt heavier now, but not in a sudden way. It was gradual, layered, like something that had been building quietly for a long time and was only now asking to be acknowledged. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Time was moving. It always was. I just hadn't been paying attention to how much of it had already passed. The closer I got to the care center, the quieter my thoughts became. Not because they were gone, but because they had settled into something deeper, something harder to push away. I turned onto the final road, a narrow stretch lined with tall trees that cast long shadows across the pavement. I remembered this part clearly. I had driven here before, just not enough times to feel like I should have. The building came into view slowly, almost gently, as if it wasn't trying to announce itself. Greenfield Care Center. It looked the same.
Clean.
Quiet.
Still.
I slowed the car as I approached the entrance, my hand steady again, but my chest carrying something heavier than before. This wasn't just a visit.
I knew that now.
I pulled into the parking lot and found a spot near the front, turning off the engine and letting the silence settle around me once more. For a moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the building ahead of me, the place where she had been waiting. Waiting with patience I didn't deserve. Waiting without asking for more than I was willing to give. Until now. I rested my hands in my lap and looked down briefly, gathering something I couldn't quite name. Courage, maybe. Or just the willingness to finally face what I had been avoiding. I reached for the door handle, then paused again, just like I had back at the house. But this time, the hesitation felt different. Not avoidance, just awareness. I opened the door and stepped out into the quiet afternoon air, the sound of it closing behind me softer than I expected. And as I started walking toward the entrance, one thought stayed with me, steady and unavoidable. I hoped I wasn't too late. The automatic doors opened slowly as I stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not complete silence, but a softened version of it. The kind that exists in places where voices are lowered out of respect and footsteps are careful without being asked. The air carried a faint scent of antiseptic mixed with something warmer, like laundry detergent or brewed tea. It felt clean, controlled.
Still.
I paused just past the entrance, letting my eyes adjust as I took in the space around me. A reception desk stood a few steps ahead, with a woman seated behind it, typing gently on a keyboard. A television played somewhere down the hall, its volume low enough to blend into the background. Everything seemed calm.
Too calm.
I approached the desk slowly, my steps measured, like moving too quickly might disrupt something fragile. "Hi," I said quietly, offering a small, uncertain smile. "I'm here to see Margaret Lewis." The receptionist looked up immediately, her expression softening in a way that told me she already knew. "Of course," she said gently. "She's been expecting you." Those words settled into me before I could respond. "Been expecting you." I nodded, swallowing lightly. "Can you tell me where she is?" "She's in room 214, the receptionist replied, gesturing down the hallway to my left. "Just past the lounge area." "Thank you." I turned, following the direction she pointed, and started walking down the corridor. The hallway stretched longer than I anticipated, lined with doors that were slightly open, offering brief glimpses into other lives. A quiet conversation here, a nurse adjusting blankets there, someone staring out a window with a distant expression I couldn't quite read. I slowed my pace without meaning to. Each step felt heavier the farther I went, like I was approaching something I couldn't undo once I reached it. Room 214. I repeated the number in my mind, as if holding on to it would keep everything else steady. As I passed the small lounge area, I noticed a few residents sitting together, their attention fixed on a television screen. One of them laughed softly at something I couldn't hear, and for a moment, the sound felt out of place. Or maybe I did. I continued down the hall until I saw it. The numbers were simple, fixed neatly beside the door, like any other room. Nothing about it stood out. Nothing about it warned me, and yet I stopped. My hand hovered just slightly near the doorframe, not touching it yet. I could hear something inside, not voices, just a faint mechanical rhythm, a machine. I exhaled slowly, my breath steadier than I expected, and gently pushed the door open. The room was softly lit, sunlight filtering through a thin curtain by the window. It cast a pale glow across the space, making everything feel quieter than it already was. And then I saw her. For a moment, I didn't move. She looked smaller than I remembered. That was the first thought that came to me, and it stayed there longer than anything else. The woman who once filled every room with quiet strength now seemed almost folded into the bed, her body still beneath the blanket. Her hair, once carefully styled every morning, lay softly against the pillow, thinner and more delicate than before. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent under the light, and her hands rested gently at her sides. But her eyes were open, and they found me almost immediately. There was no confusion in them, no hesitation, just recognition. I felt something tighten in my chest as I stepped closer, my movements slower now, more careful, like I was afraid of breaking the moment just by being there. "Hi, Grandma," I said softly. My voice sounded different to me, quieter, smaller. Her lips curved slightly, forming the faintest smile, but it was enough to shift something inside me. "You came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but still carrying that same warmth I had known my entire life. I nodded quickly, stepping closer to the side of her bed. "Of course I came." The words felt simple, but they carried something heavier beneath them. I reached for her hand without thinking, my fingers wrapping gently around hers. It felt lighter than I expected, her skin cooler, more fragile. But she squeezed back, just a little, enough to tell me she was still there. "I was hoping you would," she said softly. I swallowed, blinking once as I tried to keep my composure steady. "I'm sorry it took me so long," I said before I could stop myself. The words slipped out naturally, like they had been waiting. She shook her head slightly, the movement slow but intentional. "No," she whispered. "You're here now." That was all she said. No guilt, no questions, no mention of missed calls or forgotten visits. Just acceptance. And somehow, that made it harder. I pulled a chair closer and sat down beside her, still holding her hand, not wanting to let go now that I had it. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The room filled with the quiet rhythm of the machine beside her, a soft, steady reminder of time moving in its own way. I glanced at it briefly, then looked back at her, not wanting to focus on anything else. She watched me carefully, her eyes moving across my face like she was taking something in, memorizing it. "You look tired," she said gently. I let out a small, almost surprised breath, a faint smile touching my lips. "I've been busy," I replied. It sounded like an excuse, even to me. She didn't respond right away. Instead, her thumb moved slightly against my hand, a small, familiar gesture that carried more comfort than anything she could have said. "I know," she said after a moment. And again, there was no judgment in her voice, just understanding. That quiet understanding she had always given so freely. I looked down at her hands, noticing how different they were now. Hers softer, thinner. Mine steady but holding on a little tighter than necessary. I should have come more, I admitted, my voice softer now. This time, she didn't shake her head. She simply looked at me, her expression calm, almost peaceful. "We always think there's more time," she said gently. The words settled between us, simple and undeniable. I nodded slowly, feeling them land deeper than anything else she had said so far. "I thought I had more time," I whispered. Her fingers pressed lightly against mine again, that small squeeze returning. "We all do," she replied. A quiet filled the room again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of things we hadn't said, things we didn't need to say. I glanced around the room briefly, taking in the small details I hadn't noticed before. A framed photo on the side table, a book resting unopened beside it, a cardigan draped neatly over the chair in the corner. Pieces of her life, gathered into this one small space. And suddenly, it all felt very temporary. I looked back at her, really looking this time, letting myself see what I had been avoiding since I walked in. She was tired, not just physically. There was a softness to her, a quiet stillness that felt different from anything I had seen before. But she was still here, still aware, still present, still my grandmother. "I'm here," I said again, more firmly this time. She smiled softly, her eyes holding mine. "I know," she whispered. And as I sat there beside her, holding her hand in that quiet room, one thing became clear in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Time wasn't something waiting for us outside that door. It was here, in this room, and there wasn't much of it left. She closed her eyes for a moment, not fully asleep, just resting in that quiet way she always had. I stayed where I was, still holding her hand, careful not to move too much. The room felt softer now, like everything had slowed to match her breathing. The machine beside her continued its steady rhythm, but it faded into the background the longer I sat there. I watched her for a while, noticing the small details I had missed before. The way her chest rose gently with each breath. The faint lines around her eyes that had deepened over the years. The softness in her expression, even in rest. And without meaning to, my mind drifted backward. Not quickly, not all at once, just slowly, like turning the pages of something familiar. I could see her kitchen first. It always starts there. The smell of something warm in the oven, usually before I even stepped inside. She never cooked anything halfway. Everything had time, attention, patience. The counters were always clean, but never empty. There was always something in progress. I must have been 10, maybe younger, standing on a chair beside her while she stirred something in a large pot. "Careful," she would say, not because I was doing anything wrong, but because she liked reminding me that things mattered. I smiled faintly at the memory, my thumb brushing lightly against her hand in the present. "You always rushed," she'd add, glancing at me with that quiet smile. And she was right. Even then, I shifted slightly in the chair, letting the memory settle deeper before the next one came. Summer afternoons. Her backyard felt bigger than it actually was. It had a way of stretching when you were a child, turning into something almost endless. She kept a small garden near the fence, rows of flowers I never bothered to learn the names of. But she knew all of them. "Look at that color," she would say, kneeling beside them, her fingers brushing lightly over the petals like they were something delicate and important. I would nod, pretending to understand, already thinking about the next thing I wanted to do. She never rushed me. She just stayed there a little longer, noticing things I didn't have the patience for. I glanced back at her now, lying quietly in the bed, and felt something tighten gently in my chest. She had always been present, fully, even in the smallest moments. I leaned back slightly in the chair, my eyes drifting toward the window before another memory surfaced. Her car, an old sedan that always smelled faintly of peppermint, and something floral I could never quite place. She kept everything in order, even the glove compartment. Napkins folded neatly, candies lined up like they belonged there. "Just one," she would say every time, handing me a peppermint before starting the engine. I used to think she said that because she didn't want me to have too many. Now I realize it was just her way of making something small feel intentional. I let out a quiet breath, my gaze returning to her face. Even now, there was that same intention in everything about her. Nothing wasted, nothing careless. Another memory followed, softer than the others. Evenings at her house, the television on low, casting a warm glow across the room. I would sit on the floor sometimes, flipping through something I wasn't really paying attention to, while she sat in her chair nearby. She didn't talk constantly. She didn't need to. But every now and then, she would say something simple. "Did you have a good day?" And she would wait. Actually wait. Not half listening. Not distracted. Fully there. I swallowed slowly, realizing how rare that kind of attention had become in my own life. I was always moving. Always thinking about the next thing, the next task, the next responsibility. She never lived like that. She lived in moments, and I had spent most of mine rushing past them. I looked down at our hands again, noticing how naturally mine had wrapped around hers, like it had done so many times before without me realizing it. There was a steadiness in her touch. Even now. Fainter, yes, but still there. I remembered the way she used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. Not tightly, not controlling, just enough to let me know she was there. Safe. I blinked slowly, letting that memory linger before another one surfaced. The last Thanksgiving I spent at her house. It hadn't been that long ago, but it felt distant now. She had moved a little slower that year, but she still insisted on cooking everything herself. I offered to help, of course, but not in a way that really meant it. "I've got it," she said, smiling as she always did. And I let her. I stayed in the living room longer than I should have, checking my phone, answering messages, half present even then. I didn't notice how tired she looked. Not really. I shifted in my seat now, a quiet discomfort settling deeper inside me. That was the thing about memories. They don't just bring back what happened. They show you what you missed. I lifted my gaze back to her face, watching her as she rested. Her breathing was steady, calm. There was no sign of struggle in that moment, just stillness. And suddenly I saw her differently, not just as she was now, but as everything she had been. The woman who raised my mother, the one who held our family together in ways no one ever really talked about, the one who showed love without needing to say it loudly. She had never asked for much, just time, just presence, and I had treated both like they were unlimited. I exhaled slowly, my chest rising and falling with a quiet weight I couldn't ignore anymore. "I remember everything," I said softly, not even sure if she could hear me. But I said it anyway, because I needed to. I just didn't realize how much it mattered. My voice barely carried across the room, but it didn't need to. The words weren't for anyone else. They were for me. I felt her fingers move slightly in mine, just enough to bring me back to the present. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light, and found me again without searching. There it was. That same look.
Warm. Steady.
Knowing. You always remembered, she said quietly. Her voice was soft, but clear enough to reach me fully. I shook my head gently, a faint, almost regretful smile touching my lips. Not the way I should have. She studied my face for a moment, not correcting me, not arguing, just seeing me, and somehow that was enough. The room felt quieter again, but not empty. It was filled with something deeper now, not just memories, understanding. I leaned forward slightly, still holding her hand, not wanting to lose that connection now that I finally felt it clearly. I wish I had slowed down, I admitted. The words came easier this time. I wish I had sat with you more, listened more. She didn't respond immediately. Her gaze stayed on mine, steady and calm, like she was giving the moment the space it deserved. Then, gently, she spoke. You're here now. The same words she had said before, but this time they felt different, not just comforting, meaningful, because now I understood what they carried. This moment, this room, this time, it wasn't about what I had missed anymore. It was about what I still had. And as I sat there beside her, holding her hand while the past and present quietly met in between us, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. She had never measured love by how often I showed up. She measured it by whether I was truly there when it mattered. And now, I finally was. The room stayed quiet for a while after that, but it felt different now. Not heavy, not uncertain, just still in a way that allowed everything to settle where it needed to. I adjusted slightly in my chair, careful not to disturb her, though her eyes were open again, watching me with that same calm attention she had always given so effortlessly. It made me sit a little straighter without realizing it, like I needed to be fully present now, not halfway, not distracted. Fully here. Her fingers shifted gently in mine, a small movement, but intentional enough to draw my attention back to her face. Emily, she said softly. There was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Not urgency, not fear, but purpose. I leaned forward slightly, my grip on her hand tightening just enough to let her know I was listening. I'm here, I replied quietly. She held my gaze for a moment, her eyes searching mine in a way that felt deeper than anything we had shared so far. Then she glanced briefly toward the door. Would you mind closing that? She asked, her voice steady but softer now. I followed her gaze, noticing the door was slightly open, just enough for the hallway light to spill in. Of course, I said, standing carefully. I walked over and gently pushed the door until it clicked softly into place. The sound was quiet, but it seemed to seal the room in a different kind of silence. More private, more intentional. I turned back toward her, and for a moment, I just stood there, noticing how small the room felt now that it held only the two of us. No distractions, no interruptions, just this moment. I walked back to the chair and sat down again, a little closer this time. Her eyes followed me the entire way. Better, she whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was agreeing about the door or something else entirely. There was a pause. Not empty, just careful, like she was deciding where to begin. I've been thinking a lot lately, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I listened without speaking, letting her take her time. About things I didn't finish, she continued. Her words were slow, measured, like each one carried more weight than it appeared to. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet tension beginning to form, though I couldn't yet place it. You don't have to worry about anything, I said gently. We'll take care of everything. It felt like the right thing to say, practical, reassuring. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I saw a faint smile form on her lips. Not dismissive, just knowing. That's not what I mean, she said softly. I swallowed, nodding slightly as I leaned in a little closer. Okay, I said. Then tell me. She studied my face again, like she was making sure I was truly ready this time. Not just hearing her. Listening. I need to ask you something, she said. There it was. The shift. I felt it fully now. a quiet weight settling into the space between us. Anything, I replied, almost instinctively. And I meant it. At least I thought I did. Her hand tightened slightly in mine, the small movement grounding and unsettling at the same time. It's important, she added. I nodded again, slower this time. I understand, but the truth was, I didn't. Not yet. She took a slow breath, her chest rising gently beneath the blanket, and for a moment, I thought she might stop there. That maybe the effort was too much. But then she continued. There's something I've carried for a long time, she said, her voice softer now, but still clear. My chest tightened slightly, not out of fear, but anticipation. There are things in life, she went on, that don't get resolved the way we think they will. I stayed quiet, letting her words unfold without interrupting them. Sometimes, she added, we tell ourselves there will be another chance. The sentence lingered in the air between us, and suddenly it felt familiar. Too familiar. I shifted slightly in my chair, my grip on her hand tightening just a little more. Her eyes didn't leave mine. I don't have another chance anymore, she said gently. That was the moment everything became real in a different way. Not just her condition, not just the situation,
but what she was about to ask.
I felt it before she even said it. A quiet resistance building somewhere deep inside me. Not logical, not fully formed, just there, waiting. I need you to do something for me, she said. The words landed softly, but they carried more weight than anything else she had said so far. My first instinct was to nod, to agree immediately, to make it easy.
Of course, I said.
But this time, the words felt different coming out. Less certain, more cautious. She noticed.
Of course she did.
She always noticed. It won't be easy, she added, her voice steady, her eyes still holding mine. I felt my stomach tighten slightly, a quiet unease beginning to rise. What is it? I asked. My voice was calm, but inside, something had already started to brace itself. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down briefly at our hands, her fingers moving lightly against mine, as if grounding herself before continuing. Then she looked back up at me. There's someone, she said slowly. That was all it took. Just those two words. And already, my mind began to move ahead of her, searching for possibilities I wasn't ready to face. I felt my shoulders stiffen slightly, though I tried not to show it. Someone, I repeated. She nodded faintly. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew exactly what it would mean once she said it. I need you to find them, she continued. The air in the room felt heavier now, the stillness no longer calm, but filled with something unspoken. Find them? I asked quietly. My voice sounded different again. More guarded, more careful. She nodded again, her expression unchanged, but her eyes carrying something deeper now.
Talk to them, she said. For me.
There it was. The request had taken shape, but not fully.
Not yet.
And somehow that made it harder.
Who? I asked.
The question came out softer than I expected, almost hesitant. She held my gaze for a moment longer, and I could see it now. The weight she had been carrying. The reason this wasn't easy. For her. Or for me. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady, but quieter than before. You already know who. And just like that, the room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. Everything inside me stilled. Because she was right. I did know. I just hadn't let myself think about it in a long time. I looked away for the first time since the conversation began, my eyes dropping to the floor as a familiar name formed quietly in my mind. One I hadn't said. One I had avoided. For years. My grip on her hand loosened slightly, not intentionally, but enough for her to notice. I felt her fingers pressed gently against mine again. Not to hold me there. Just to remind me she was still with me. I exhaled slowly, my chest rising with a quiet heaviness I couldn't ignore anymore. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been prepared for when I walked into this room. This wasn't just a conversation. It was the beginning of something I didn't want to face. And she knew it. That's why she had waited. That's why she had asked for me. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. I didn't look up right away. Her words lingered between us, quiet but impossible to ignore. I could feel them settling into places I had kept closed for years, pressing gently against something I had worked hard not to revisit. You already know who. I exhaled slowly, my eyes still fixed on the floor, as if staying there might delay what came next. But it didn't, because the name was already there. Clear. Unavoidable. I haven't thought about them in a long time, I said finally, my voice low and careful. It wasn't entirely true. I had thought about them, just not in a way I allowed to stay. My grandmother didn't respond immediately. She didn't rush to fill the silence or soften what she had asked. She just waited. That quiet patience again. The same one I had taken for granted more times than I could count. I lifted my gaze slowly, meeting her eyes again, and there was something in them I hadn't seen before. Not just warmth, not just calm, but something deeper. Something that carried weight. You don't have to be afraid of it, she said gently. I let out a small breath that almost felt like a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. I'm not afraid, I replied. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Not fear in the obvious sense. Not panic or anxiety. Something quieter. Something heavier. Avoidance. I just don't see what good it would do now, I added, my voice tightening slightly despite my effort to keep it steady. There's nothing left there. The words felt firm as they left me. Definite. Closed. She watched me closely, her expression unchanged, but her eyes holding something that made it difficult to look away. There's always something left, she said softly. I shook my head, just a little, my fingers shifting against hers. No, I said quietly. Not this time. The room fell into silence again, but this one felt different. Not calm, not reflective, tense, not outwardly, but inside me. She didn't argue. She didn't push. Instead, she took a slow breath, her chest rising gently as she gathered her strength. I never told you everything, she said. That caught me off guard. My brow furrowed slightly as I leaned forward without realizing it. What do you mean? Her gaze drifted for a moment, not away from me, but somewhere deeper, like she was reaching into something she hadn't touched in a long time. There are things we keep, she continued softly, not because we want it, but because we think it protects the people we love. I stayed quiet, listening now in a different way, more carefully, more open. I thought I was doing the right thing, she added. Her voice didn't carry regret exactly, but it carried reflection, and that made it heavier. What things? I asked. My voice was softer now, less resistant. She looked back at me, her eyes finding mine again with that same steady presence. The distance between you and them, she said slowly. It wasn't as simple as you believed. I felt my chest tighten again, sharper this time. What are you saying? She hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because she understood what this moment would change. I'm saying there were things you didn't know, she replied gently. I leaned back slightly, my grip on her hand loosening again as my mind tried to process what she was telling me. For years, I let you carry that distance, she continued. I let you believe it was final. The words landed heavier now, because they weren't just about the past. They were about something I had accepted as truth, something I had built around. Why? I asked. It came out more quickly than I intended, more sharply. She didn't flinch. I thought it would keep you from being hurt again, she said. I swallowed, my jaw tightening slightly. Hurt again? I repeated. My voice was quieter now, but it carried something beneath it, something unsettled. She nodded faintly. There were choices made, she said. Not all of them were what they seemed. I shook my head again, slower this time. That doesn't change anything, I said. But the certainty I had before wasn't there anymore. Not fully. There are things you deserve to hear, she added. Her hand pressed gently against mine again, grounding, steady. Not from me. That was the moment something shifted. Deep. Uncomfortable. Because now, this wasn't just about the past. It was about reopening it. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, my voice low, almost careful again. It's been too long. She watched me quietly, her expression soft but unwavering. Time doesn't close everything, she said. I looked away again, this time toward the window, the soft light still filtering through the curtain like nothing had changed. But everything had. I've made peace with it, I added, though the words felt less solid than they once had. Have you? She asked gently. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. The silence stretched between us again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time.
Doubt.
I exhaled slowly, my shoulders dropping just slightly. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked finally. There it was. Not resistance. Not acceptance. Just clarity. She held my gaze, her eyes softer now, but still carrying that same quiet strength. I want you to find them, she said again, her voice steady despite its softness. I want you to listen. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything else. And then, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a slow breath. And then decide for yourself, she said. No pressure. No direction. Just truth. I sat there, staring at her, feeling the weight of everything she was asking settle fully now. This wasn't just a favor. It wasn't something small. It was something that would change things. Things I had kept still for a reason. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted. The words came out quietly but honestly. She didn't look disappointed. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded slightly, like she had expected that answer. I know, she said softly. Her fingers moved gently against mine again, that same familiar comfort. But I need you to try. That was the part that broke something inside me. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, because she wasn't asking for certainty. She wasn't asking for success, just effort. And somehow that felt harder. I closed my eyes briefly, taking a slow breath as everything settled into place.
The past.
The distance. The truth I didn't fully understand yet. And her, sitting here, asking me for this. Her last wish. I opened my eyes again, looking at her differently now. Not just as my grandmother, but as someone trusting me with something unfinished. Something that mattered to her. I don't want to do it, I said quietly. The honesty felt necessary. She nodded again. I know. I swallowed, my throat tightening slightly as I looked down at our hands once more. But if it matters to you, my voice faltered for just a moment, then steadied. Then I'll try. The words felt heavy as they settled into the room. Not complete, not confident, but real. Her expression softened, a small, peaceful smile forming as her eyes stayed on mine. That's all I'm asking, she whispered. And as I sat there, holding her hand in that quiet room, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until now. Her last wish wasn't just about the past. It was about giving me something I didn't even know I still needed. The chance to face it. The words stayed in the room long after I said them. Then I'll try. They didn't feel final. They didn't feel strong or certain. But they were enough to shift something between us. I could see it in her face, in the way her shoulders seemed to relax just slightly against the pillow. Not relief in a dramatic way, just peace, a quiet kind of settling. I kept holding her hand, my fingers wrapped around hers a little more carefully now, like the promise had changed the way I touched everything in that moment. She studied me for a few seconds, her eyes softer than before, almost searching for something deeper than the words I had given her. Say it again, she whispered. Her voice was gentle, but there was something firm beneath it. I hesitated, not because I didn't understand what she meant, but because repeating it would make it real in a way I couldn't take back. I will try, I said again, more slowly this time. She shook her head faintly.
No, she said.
Not try. I felt my chest tighten slightly, a quiet resistance rising again, though weaker than before. She watched me with that same steady gaze. I need you to promise me. There it was, the line I had been hoping not to cross. A promise wasn't something you could soften or reshape later. It didn't leave room for uncertainty. It didn't allow distance. It stayed. I looked down at our hands again, noticing how small hers felt inside mine now. Fragile, but still steady. I don't know if I can promise that, I admitted quietly. The words felt heavy but honest. She didn't pull her hand away. She didn't look disappointed. She just listened. I don't even know what I'll find, I continued, or how it'll affect things. My voice slowed, the weight of it catching up to me. I've spent years trying to move forward, I added. I don't want to go back and reopen something that might just hurt again. The room held my words gently, without judgment, without interruption. She let them settle before she spoke. I understand that, she said softly. And I knew she did. That was what made this harder. Because she wasn't asking from a place of misunderstanding. She was asking despite it. But this isn't about going back, she continued. I lifted my eyes to meet hers again. It's about finishing something that was never given a chance to end properly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth in it was enough. I stayed quiet, letting her words move through me slowly, pressing against the parts of me that still resisted. I don't want you to carry something unfinished for the rest of your life, she added. Her fingers moved slightly against mine again, that same grounding touch she had always used. I've seen what that does to people. I swallowed, my throat tightening as I held her gaze. And I don't want that for you. There was no urgency in her tone, no fear, just care, deep, steady care. I looked away for a moment, toward the window again, though I wasn't really seeing anything outside. My thoughts had turned inward, circling around something I hadn't allowed myself to face before. Unfinished. The words stayed with me, because maybe that was what it had always been. Not closed, not resolved, just left behind. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders dropping slightly as the resistance inside me shifted. Not gone, but softer, less certain. I turned back to her, my eyes settling on her face again. She looked tired now, more than before, not just physically, but like the effort of this conversation had taken something from her. And suddenly, the weight of the moment changed. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her, about what she needed before she let go. I tightened my hold on her hand gently, careful not to hurt her. Why does it matter so much to you? I asked. The question came out quieter than I expected. Not challenging, just searching. She smiled faintly, her eyes softening even more. Because I know what it's like to wish you had one more chance, she said. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper than anything she had said so far. A history I hadn't fully known, a feeling I hadn't understood. Until now, I felt my chest tighten again, but this time it wasn't resistance. It was something else, something closer to understanding. I don't want you to reach my age, she continued gently, and wonder what would have happened if you had just been brave enough to face it. Her voice softened even more toward the end, but it didn't lose its clarity. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't fully noticed before. Not just her present, but her past. The things she hadn't said, the things she had carried. And suddenly, this wasn't just her asking me for something. It was her giving me something, a chance she hadn't had. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting everything settle. The fear, the hesitation, the weight of the past, and her, sitting here, trusting me with this. When I opened my eyes again, something had shifted. Not completely, but enough. I took a slow breath, my grip on her hand steady now. Okay, I said quietly. She didn't respond right away. She waited, the way she always did. Okay, I repeated, this time with more clarity. I promise. The words felt different from anything I had said before. Heavier, but also clearer, like something had finally aligned inside me. Her expression softened fully now, that small, peaceful smile returning as her eyes stayed on mine. Thank you, she whispered. Her voice was barely there, but it carried everything it needed to. I felt her hand relax slightly in mine, not slipping away, just easing into a kind of stillness that felt almost like relief. We sat there for a while after that, neither of us speaking. The room returned to that quiet rhythm again, the soft hum of the machine, the light filtering through the curtain, the world outside continuing without knowing what had just changed inside this small space. I watched her closely, noticing how her breathing had slowed, how the tension that had been there before had softened into something calmer. "You should rest," I said gently. She nodded faintly, her eyes still on mine. "I will," she replied softly, but she didn't close them right away. Instead, she held my gaze for a few seconds longer, like she was memorizing something, or maybe letting go. Her fingers moved one last time against mine, a small, familiar squeeze, the same one she had given me when I was a child, reassuring,
Steady. Present.
Then, slowly, her eyes closed. Her breathing remained calm, even, peaceful. I stayed where I was, not moving, still holding her hand, not ready to let go just yet. The promise sat quietly inside me now. Not loud, not overwhelming, but present, real. And as I sat there beside her, in that quiet room filled with everything we had just shared, I realized something I hadn't expected. The promise hadn't just changed what I would do next. It had already started to change me. The room felt quieter than before, but not in a way that made me uneasy. It felt settled, like something important had already happened, and now everything else was just gently following behind it. I was still sitting beside her, my hand wrapped around hers, feeling the softness of her skin against my fingers. Her eyes remained closed, her breathing slow and even, the faint rise and fall of her chest the only movement in the room. For a while, I just watched, not thinking, not analyzing, just being there. The light through the window had shifted slightly, stretching farther across the floor now, touching the edge of the bed. Time had moved, even though it didn't feel like it. I adjusted in my chair carefully, not wanting to disturb her, though something in me already knew she wasn't really sleeping. Not in the usual sense. Her hand felt different now, still warm, but quieter, less responsive. I tightened my grip just slightly, my thumb brushing gently over her knuckles, waiting for that small, familiar squeeze in return. It didn't come. I swallowed slowly, my eyes lifting to her face again. "Grandma?" I said softly. My voice barely carried, but it felt louder in the stillness of the room. There was no response. Her expression hadn't changed. It was still peaceful, still calm, as if she had simply drifted deeper into rest. I leaned forward a little, my heart beginning to beat just slightly faster, though everything around me remained quiet. "Grandma," I said again, a little firmer this time. Nothing. The machine beside her continued its steady rhythm, but even that sound seemed distant now, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I felt my chest tighten, not sharply, but gradually, like something was closing in slowly. I shifted my chair closer, my hand now holding hers more firmly. "I'm here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was saying it for her or for myself. Her breathing, I watched carefully, waited. It was so subtle now that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it or not. I leaned in closer, my eyes fixed on her chest, searching for movement. There was a pause, a long one, longer than before, and then nothing. The room didn't change. The light stayed the same. The air didn't shift, but something had. I felt it before I fully understood it. A stillness that was different from rest. Final. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, holding her hand, waiting for something to happen that I already knew wouldn't. A nurse entered quietly a few moments later, her steps soft, practiced, like she had walked into rooms like this many times before. She paused when she saw me, her expression gentle, understanding. "I'll just check on her," she said quietly. I nodded, though I didn't look away from my grandmother. The nurse moved closer, placing her fingers lightly near her wrist, then adjusting something on the machine. The silence stretched. Then softly, she looked at me. "I'm so sorry," she said. Her voice was kind, but distant, like it was meant to reach me, but couldn't quite get there. I nodded again, though I wasn't sure why. The words didn't land. Not yet. I looked back at my grandmother, really looking now, noticing the stillness in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. Her face was peaceful, more peaceful than I had seen it in a long time. There was no tension, no discomfort, just quiet. I exhaled slowly, my grip on her hand tightening again, though it no longer responded. "She was waiting for you," the nurse added gently. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not a sudden break, not overwhelming, just a quiet, heavy realization settling into place. She had waited. Through all the days I hadn't come, through all the calls I hadn't answered, she had waited. For this. For me. I lowered my head slightly, my eyes closing for a brief moment as I let that truth settle fully. "I'm here," I whispered again, though now the words felt different.
Late.
But still real. The nurse gave me a moment, then quietly stepped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. And just like that, it was only us again. But not in the same way as before. I stayed there, sitting beside her, holding her hand, not ready to let go. Time moved differently now. Slower.
Heavier.
I didn't cry right away. There was no sudden release, no dramatic moment. Just stillness. A quiet emptiness that filled the space where something had been. I looked around the room again, the small details returning to focus. The photograph on the table, the book she hadn't finished, the cardigan folded neatly in the corner. All the small pieces of her life, still here, even though she wasn't. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forehead gently against the back of her hand, my eyes closing as I took a slow breath. "Thank you," I whispered. The words came naturally, not planned, not forced, just there, for everything she had been, for everything she had given, for the patience, the quiet love, the understanding I hadn't always deserved. I stayed like that for a while, not measuring the time, not needing to. Eventually, I lifted my head, my eyes tracing her face one more time, memorizing it. Not the version of her I saw now, but all the versions I had known. The one in the kitchen, the one in the garden, the one who noticed everything I rushed past. I reached up with my free hand and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face, the motion slow, careful, like I had all the time in the world now. "I'll do it," I said quietly. The promise felt different now, not just something I had given, something I carried. "I promise." The words settled into the room, softer this time, but deeper. I sat there a little longer, holding her hand, letting the reality come in slowly, piece by piece. Then, finally, I placed her hand gently back on the bed, my fingers lingering for just a moment before letting go. Standing up felt harder than it should have, like I was leaving something behind, or maybe taking something with me. I walked toward the door slowly, each step steady but heavy, my hand reaching for the handle before pausing one last time. I looked back. The room was still, peaceful, and for the first time since I arrived, I understood something clearly. Her last moment hadn't been about fear or regret. It had been about completion. She had said what she needed to say. She had trusted me with what mattered most. And then she let go. I opened the door quietly and stepped out into the hallway, the soft sounds of the world returning around me. But nothing felt the same anymore. Because now I wasn't just walking away from that room. I was walking forward with a promise I couldn't ignore. The first few days after the funeral passed in a quiet blur I couldn't fully hold on to. People came and went, offering gentle words, brief hugs, and stories about her that all seemed to circle around the same truth. She had been kind. She had been steady. She had been the kind of person who stayed. I stood through most of it with a calm I didn't question at the time. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because everything I felt seemed to sit deeper than tears could reach. The service itself was simple, just like she would have wanted. Soft music played in the background, and a few close family members spoke about her life in ways that felt both complete and somehow still unfinished. I listened, but not entirely. Part of me was somewhere else. Not in the past. Not fully in the present. Just suspended. The promise I made to her hadn't left me, even for a moment. It stayed there, quiet but constant, like something waiting patiently for me to stop standing still. After everyone had gone, and the house felt empty again, I found myself sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at my phone without picking it up. The same place I had been when everything started. But I wasn't the same person sitting there anymore. I traced my finger lightly along the edge of the table, my thoughts moving slowly, deliberately, like I was trying not to rush through something important. There's always something left. Her voice came back to me, clear and steady. I exhaled quietly, leaning back in my chair, my eyes drifting toward the window. It was late afternoon again. The light looked almost identical to the day I got the call.
But nothing inside me felt the same.
I reached for my phone, not quickly, not impulsively, just intentionally. My thumb hovered over the screen as I unlocked it, and for a moment, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what it would mean once I did it. This wasn't just a call. It was a door, one I had closed years ago, one I had convinced myself didn't need to be opened again. I swallowed slowly, then opened my contacts. The name wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. I had removed it a long time ago. Not out of anger, just distance. I shifted slightly in my seat, my mind moving through the steps I needed to take. There were other ways. Old emails, messages, mutual connections I hadn't spoken to in years. I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the table as I opened my email instead. The search bar blinked at me, waiting. I stared at it for a moment, my fingers still. Then, slowly, I typed the name. Each letter felt heavier than it should have. But I didn't stop. The results appeared almost instantly. Conversations I hadn't looked at in years. Threads that ended without closure. Words left hanging. I clicked on one. The screen filled with messages from a different version of my life.
Plans.
Arguments. Silences. I read a few lines, then stopped. It wasn't about going back. She had said that. It was about finishing something. I exhaled again, my chest rising a little deeper this time, then closed the thread. Instead, I searched for something more recent, something that might lead me forward. It didn't take long. A newer email address appeared, tied to something professional. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I sat there, staring at it, my mind quiet now in a way that felt unfamiliar. No overthinking, no running, just a decision waiting to be made. I opened a new message. The blank space in front of me felt larger than it should have. I placed my fingers on the keyboard, then paused. What do you say after years of silence? What words don't sound forced, or late, or unnecessary? I let my hands rest there, not rushing to fill the space. Then, slowly, I started typing. Not a long message, not a perfect one, just something honest, something simple, something real. When I finished, I read it once, then again. My chest tightened slightly, but not with fear this time, with something else, readiness. I clicked send. The message disappeared, replaced by the quiet stillness of the screen. And just like that, it was done. The first step. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting in my lap, my eyes fixed on nothing in particular. I didn't expect an immediate reply. I didn't expect anything at all. That wasn't the point. The point was that I had done it. I had stepped into something I had avoided for years. And somehow it didn't feel as heavy as I thought it would. Later that evening, I found myself driving without a clear destination. The road stretched out in front of me, familiar but unnoticed, as my thoughts moved more freely now. Not stuck, not circling, just moving. I stopped at a small park without planning to, the same one I had passed days earlier. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment before stepping out, the cool air meeting me in a quiet, steady way. I walked slowly along the path, my hands in my pockets, my gaze drifting over the trees, the open space, the small details I might have missed before. Look at that color. Her voice came back again, and this time I stopped. I actually stopped, my eyes settling on a small cluster of flowers near the edge of the path.
Bright.
Simple. Easy to overlook. But I didn't overlook them. I stood there for a moment, just noticing, just being there. And for the first time in a long time, I understood what she had meant. Not just then, but always. I exhaled slowly, a small, quiet smile forming without effort. The past wasn't something I had to carry the same way anymore. It wasn't closed. Not yet. But it wasn't something I needed to avoid either. It was something I could face. Something I could finish. My phone vibrated softly in my pocket. The sound pulled me back gently, not sharply. I reached for it, my fingers steady as I looked at the screen. A new message. From an address I recognized. I stared at it for a moment, my chest tightening just slightly. Then slowly I opened it. The message was short, careful, but real. And in that moment, standing there in the quiet of the park, I felt something shift again. Not closure, not yet, but a beginning. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, my gaze lifting toward the open sky as the light began to fade into evening. And as I stood there, feeling the quiet weight of everything that had changed, one thought settled clearly into place. Her last wish had broken my heart, but in the end, it had also given it a way forward. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to reach out to someone you've been thinking about. And if you believe in stories that remind us what really matters, you can subscribe and stay with us for more like this.